The 24th of June, 2009, Los Angeles. The sun is setting over Holmby Hills, and somewhere inside a massive rented mansion on North Carrollwood Drive, the greatest entertainer who ever lived is getting ready for what he believes will be the most important night of his rehearsals. He doesn't know it yet, but he has exactly 24 hours left to live. What happened inside those 24 hours has been reported, investigated, debated, and dissected for over a decade. Witnesses testified, lawyers argued, a doctor went to prison. But even after all of that, the full truth of Michael Jackson's last day has never been told completely. Because the real story isn't just about a doctor who made a fatal decision. It's about everything that led to that one room, that one night, that one injection, and why absolutely nobody stopped it. This is the story of Michael Jackson's final 24 hours. And it's stranger than anyone knew. The 24th of June, 2009. Staples Center, Los Angeles. The venue that had hosted NBA championships, world-famous concerts, and legendary performances was now being transformed into something extraordinary. A stage unlike anything ever built before, massive LED screens, mechanical props, pyrotechnics, a production so large, so expensive, so technically complex that it had taken months just to design. All of it, every single dollar, every single bolt built for one man, Michael Jackson. And that evening, he walked in. People who were there that night described something almost impossible to explain. The moment Michael stepped onto that stage, something shifted in the room, not because of who he was, but because of how he looked. He was thin, visibly, alarmingly thin. His clothes seemed to hang off him like they belonged to someone else. His cheekbones were sharp. His hands, when he stretched them out to feel the stage, looked fragile. But then the music started, and something happened. The man who had looked like he might break, transformed. He moved with a precision that stunned everyone watching. He hit every mark. He remembered every cue. He performed Earth Song with a power that made grown men and women on the production crew stop what they were doing and simply watch. Director Kenny Ortega, who had been deeply worried about Michael for weeks, later said that on June 24th, Michael was on fire. He was present. He was locked in. He was, in that moment, undeniably, the greatest performer alive. The rehearsal lasted nearly 2 hours. When it ended, Michael was in good spirits. He laughed with crew members. He spoke with dancers. He seemed, by every account from that night, like a man who had found something he had been searching for. Maybe he had. Maybe in those 2 hours on that stage, Michael Jackson felt, for the first time in a very long time, like himself. He didn't know those would be the last 2 hours he would ever perform. He said goodbye to his team, got into his car, and went home. The mansion on North Carrollwood Drive wasn't Michael's home in any real sense. It was a rental, a temporary address, a place he was staying while preparing for the tour. But for Michael Jackson in 2009, permanence had become a foreign concept. He hadn't had a real home since Neverland, and Neverland itself had become a wound, a place so tied to the nightmare of the 2005 trial that he could barely speak its name. So here he was, in a rented house in Holmby Hills, living out of rooms that weren't really his, sleeping in a bed that belonged to someone else, in a city that had spent years tearing him apart in the press. His 3 children were with him: Paris, Prince, Blanket, and Conrad Murray. Dr. Conrad Murray had been living in Michael's house for weeks by this point, not visiting, living. He had a room there, he ate there, he was present at almost every hour of the day. This was not a normal doctor-patient relationship. This was dependency. And that dependency had a very specific name: propofol. In medical settings, propofol is an anesthesia drug. It's used to put patients completely unconscious before surgery. It requires monitoring equipment. It requires training. It requires, at minimum, the ability to respond immediately if something goes wrong. It is not, under any definition, a sleep aid. But Michael Jackson had been calling it milk for years because of its white, milky appearance, and in his mind, in the desperate, exhausted, broken mind of a man who hadn't experienced natural sleep in possibly decades, it was the only thing that worked. Every other option had failed. Benzodiazepines, sedatives, antihistamines, sleep therapy suggestions he'd never followed through on. None of it touched the level of insomnia Michael was experiencing. Only the milk worked. And Murray had it. This is the house Michael Jackson came home to on the night of June 24th. This is the world he walked back into after those 2 luminous hours on stage. Most coverage of Michael Jackson's final hours begins around 1 or 2 inches the morning on June 25th. But something important happened before that. Something in the hours between Michael arriving home from rehearsal and midnight that has largely been glossed over. Michael was wired. Anyone who has experienced performance adrenaline understands this. After 2 hours of intense rehearsal of music, movement, choreography, emotional output, the body doesn't simply switch off. The nervous system is still firing. The heart rate is still elevated. For a normal person, this fades within a few hours. For Michael Jackson in 2009, it was catastrophic because Michael's body was not normal. It had been chemically managed for so many years that its natural rhythms were almost completely disrupted. He couldn't sleep without help. He couldn't relax without medication. His body had forgotten how to do those things on its own. So after the rehearsal high faded, and it faded fast, what replaced it was the familiar darkness, the inability to close his eyes, the anxiety crawling under his skin, the awareness, sharp and cruel, that tomorrow there would be another rehearsal, and the day after, another. And in just weeks, 50 shows, 50 nights of everything he had just done, but in front of tens of thousands of people, with no margin for error, no room for weakness, he lay in bed and couldn't sleep. This is the moment Conrad Murray's role becomes the most complicated and the most damning, because what happened next wasn't a sudden decision, it was a negotiation. 1 a.m. Michael asks Murray for something to help him sleep. Murray gives him lorazepam, 2 milligrams, a benzodiazepine sedative, the kind that would knock most people out completely. Michael Jackson barely feels it. 2 a.m., still awake. Murray administers more. The dose increases. Nothing. Time passes. The house is quiet. The children are asleep in their rooms. The city outside is dark. And in that bedroom, a man who had performed for 2 hours with breathtaking energy just hours ago is lying completely awake, staring at the ceiling, unable to shut his mind down. Murray tries midazolam, another powerful sedative. Still nothing. By 3 inches the morning, Michael has been given enough sedative medication to incapacitate multiple people, and he is still conscious. This is a fact that speaks volumes about the state of Michael Jackson's body in 2009. His tolerance to these medications had reached a level that was, by any medical standard, deeply alarming. The doses Murray was administering weren't therapeutic anymore, they were just maintenance. The hours drag on. 4 a.m., 5 a.m. Murray later testified that over the course of those night hours, he administered several different drugs in increasing doses. The full list was staggering, a combination of sedatives that in any emergency room would have required a crash cart standing by. And through all of it, Michael remained awake. Exhausted? Yes. Desperate? Absolutely. But awake. And this is where the most critical moment of those 24 hours arrives. Because at some point, the exact time is disputed, but Murray's own testimony places it around 10 inches the morning Michael Jackson stopped asking. He started demanding, "I need the milk, Conrad. I need it tonight." The exact words varied depending on which testimony you read, but the meaning was always the same. Michael wanted propofol. Murray hesitated. By his own account, he had been trying for weeks to wean Michael off propofol. He knew what it was doing. He knew the risks. He had, in his own telling, genuine concerns about continuing to administer it. But here is the thing about Conrad Murray's hesitation that becomes impossible to ignore when you examine everything around it. Murray was being paid $150,000 a month, not by Michael Jackson, by AEG Live, the production company, the same company that had pressured him in emails, the same company whose executives had written in their own words that they wanted to remind Murray who was actually paying his salary. A doctor who truly believed his patient's life was at risk had options. He could have refused. He could have called another physician. He could have suggested hospitalization. He could have, at the very minimum, called Michael's family his mother Catherine, who had been desperately worried about her son for months. Instead, Conrad Murray did none of those things. At approximately 40 inches the morning of the 25th of June 2009, Dr. Conrad Murray administered 25 milligrams of propofol to Michael Jackson via an IV drip. He also, critically, did not have proper monitoring equipment set up. No pulse oximeter, no capnography machine, no crash cart, nothing that a legitimate anesthesiologist would consider remotely acceptable for administering this drug. He gave Michael Jackson surgical anesthesia in a bedroom, and then he left the room. That detail that he left the room became the centerpiece of the entire criminal trial that followed. Murray claimed he only stepped away for 2 minutes. Prosecution argued the timeline proved it was much longer. But here is what nobody disputes. At 10:50 a.m., Michael Jackson lost consciousness. He would never regain it. There is a recording. It was made by Conrad Murray on his iPhone just days before June 25th. In it, you can hear Michael Jackson's voice, slurred, heavy, barely coherent. He is talking about the shows, about what he wants to do for the fans, about building a children's hospital, about how nobody else does what he does, how nobody else cares the way he cares. The voice on that recording does not sound like the man who lit up the Staples Center just hours earlier. It sounds like a man already half gone. Murray recorded it. He later said to show Michael what he looked like under the influence of propofol, to scare him into stopping. Whether that's true or not, nobody can say. What is true is that at 11:50 a.m. on the 25th of June 2009, Conrad Murray returned to the bedroom and Michael Jackson was not breathing. What happened in the next 10 minutes is perhaps the most damning sequence in the entire story, because Murray did not call 911. He stood there, a doctor, a cardiologist, a man trained specifically in the function and failure of the human heart, stood in that bedroom and did not immediately call for emergency services. Instead, he called his girlfriend. He called his personal assistant. He attempted CPR with one hand on a soft mattress, in a position that any first-year medical student would recognize as completely ineffective. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. It was not until 12:13 p.m., nearly half an hour after finding Michael not breathing, that Murray finally contacted someone from Jackson's team. And even then, even in that moment of absolute crisis, he couldn't bring himself to speak plainly. He didn't say, "Michael isn't breathing." He didn't say, "I think he's dying." He said Michael had a bad reaction. Get here fast. Those words, that deliberate softening of the most catastrophic possible emergency, tell you everything about what was going through Conrad Murray's mind in those moments. He wasn't thinking about saving Michael. He was thinking about what happened next for himself. Alberto Alvarez was Michael Jackson's security guard. When he received the frantic call and rushed upstairs to the bedroom, what he found stopped him cold. Not just Michael Jackson lying motionless on the bed, but Conrad Murray moving around the room, collecting things. Alvarez later testified under oath in open court that before Murray asked him to help with CPR, before anyone called 911, before any attempt was made to summon emergency help, Murray handed him IV bags and vials and told him to put them in a bag, hide them, get them out of sight. Think about what that means. A man is dying, may already be dead, and his doctor's first instinct is not to save him. It is to hide the evidence of what caused this. Alvarez complied, in a state of shock and confusion. He took the bags. He put them away. Only after the room had been partially cleared did Murray finally say the words that should have been the first words out of his mouth the moment he found Michael not breathing. "We need an ambulance." 911 was called at 12:21 p.m. The call itself is one of the most painful pieces of audio in this entire story. The person on the phone sounds panicked and overwhelmed. The dispatcher asks basic questions. There is chaos in the background. And somewhere in that bedroom, Michael Jackson, king of pop, greatest entertainer in human history, a man loved by literally billions of people, was lying alone on a bed while the world around him scrambled. Paramedics arrived within minutes. They found no pulse, they found no breathing, and they found Conrad Murray still insisting against every protocol, against every medical standard, that resuscitation should continue on scene rather than rushing Michael to hospital immediately. Michael Jackson was transported to Ronald Reagan UCLA Medical Center at 1:07 p.m. For over an hour, doctors worked. At 2:26 p.m., they stopped. Michael Joseph Jackson was pronounced dead. He was 50 years old. Here is the part of this story that breaks something inside you when you sit with it long enough. Michael Jackson's death did not come out of nowhere. It was visible. It was coming. And the people around him knew. Karen Fay, his makeup artist of over 20 years, had been watching him deteriorate for weeks. She later said she could see his ribs through his skin by mid-June. She said she feared for his life. She expressed those fears. Nothing changed. Kenny Ortega, the director of the tour, had sent emails to AEG Live executives in early June saying that Michael was not well, that he was scared, that something was deeply wrong. He had, on June 19th, less than a week before Michael died, wrapped the man in blankets, fed him by hand, and sent him home because he was shaking so badly he couldn't stand on stage. Ortega's emails to AEG were genuine expressions of human alarm. AEG's responses were about the tour, about the schedule, about the investment. One executive, the same executive who later couldn't recall his own email 30 times during depositions, had written that they needed to get Michael focused and back on track. Not healthy, not safe, back on track. Michael's mother, Katherine Jackson, knew her son was in trouble. He had called her. He had told her he didn't know if he could do 50 shows. He had told her his body couldn't handle it. She was worried, but she wasn't there. Nobody who genuinely loved Michael Jackson had any real access to him in those final weeks. He was surrounded by people on AEG's payroll, managed by a doctor on AEG's payroll, living in a house arranged by AEG, rehearsing on AEG's schedule. The people who might have saved him were on the outside, and the people on the inside had other priorities. When you lay out those final 24 hours completely, from the moment Michael arrived at the Staples Center on the evening of June 24th to the moment doctors pronounced him dead the following afternoon, a pattern emerges. It is not a story about one bad decision. It is not a story about one negligent doctor. It is a story about a system that had been consuming Michael Jackson for decades. It began in 1984 when a Pepsi commercial set his scalp on fire and introduced him to the specific kind of pharmaceutical relief that his body would spend the next 25 years chasing. It deepened through every lawsuit, every tabloid story, every year of public humiliation and private pain. It accelerated through the 2005 trial, 14 weeks of sitting in a courtroom, while prosecutors and cameras dissected every aspect of his life, his relationships, his sexuality, his face, his bank accounts. 14 weeks that people who were there say destroyed something fundamental inside him that never came back. And it culminated in a contract for 50 shows that he never agreed to but couldn't escape. In those final 24 hours, Michael Jackson performed brilliantly. He laughed with his team. He went home to his children. He lay awake in the dark, unable to close his eyes. He asked his doctor for help, and his doctor, caught between a patient he was slowly killing and a company that was paying his salary, made the choice that ended everything. What makes those 24 hours stranger than anyone knew is not just the sequence of events, it's how normal they were for Michael by that point. This wasn't an extraordinary night for him. This was Tuesday. This was what his life had become, performing at an impossible level, returning to pharmaceutical dependency to function, existing inside a structure built entirely around what he could produce rather than who he was. The extraordinary thing isn't that it ended on June 25th. The extraordinary thing is that it took as long as it did. Conrad Murray was convicted of involuntary manslaughter in 2011. He served 2 years. He lost his medical licenses in California, Nevada, and Texas. And then, in 2023, he opened a medical practice in Trinidad and Tobago. He still maintains his innocence. AEG Live was taken to civil court by Michael Jackson's mother and children. The case lasted years. In 2013, a jury found AEG not liable for Michael's death, determining that while they had hired Murray, they were not responsible for his conduct. Many people, including those closest to Michael, have never accepted that verdict. The questions that remain are not really legal questions anymore, they are human questions. Why was a man this visibly unwell allowed to continue? Why did a doctor trained to protect life spend the critical minutes after finding his patient not breathing, making personal phone calls? Why did a production company worth hundreds of millions of dollars treat a human being as a line item in a budget? Why did an industry that had profited enormously from Michael Jackson's talent spend the final months of his life watching him collapse in slow motion and do nothing meaningful to stop it? Michael Jackson's final 24 hours are strange not because of what they contain, they are strange because of what they reveal. They reveal that despite everything, despite being the most famous person alive, despite selling hundreds of millions of records, despite having an almost supernatural ability to connect with human beings through music, Michael Jackson died alone, in a rented house with a compromised doctor, while the people who loved him were outside, and the people inside were watching the clock. On the evening of the 24th of June 2009, Michael Jackson stood on a stage and reminded everyone watching exactly why he existed. 12 hours later, he was gone. The world found out on the afternoon of June 25th. News anchors stopped mid-broadcast. People collapsed in the streets. Fans gathered outside the hospital, outside his home, outside every place that had ever been connected to him in spontaneous, disbelieving grief. Because for billions of people around the world, Michael Jackson was not just a performer. He was a memory, a feeling, a soundtrack to their childhood, their first love, their best moments, and he was gone. What those final 24 hours tell us is not just the story of how Michael Jackson died. They tell us the story of how we treat the people we claim to love when their value to us becomes more important than their life. Michael Jackson couldn't be saved on the 25th of June 2009, but the truth is, the moment that made saving him impossible came long before that morning. It came every time someone looked at his pain and saw a performance, every time someone looked at his exhaustion and saw liability, every time someone looked at the greatest artist in the world and saw only what he could give them. That's the real story of Michael Jackson's final 24 hours. And now you know it. If this story moved, you share it. Subscribe. Because Michael Jackson's legacy deserves more than headlines. It deserves the truth.